So when you stereotype the other side and you demonize them, of course, automatically you're going to lack interest in their actual statements. You're going to doubt and you're going to be suspicious of everything they say. You're not going to be able to look at the world from their eyes. You're going to fail to consider what points they might be making that might be partially true and partially valid. So again, it's this sort of like debate is so oversimplified that usually it's like, well, who's right? Is it the capitalists that are right or the socialists that are right? And it's framed in such a way as though like only one of them can be all right or all wrong, which is absurd because capitalism has so much different diverse perspectives within it. There are many different kinds of capitalists. And socialism also has a lot of diversity within it too. And there's a lot of overlap between the two, so they're not totally separate camps. There are governments, in fact, virtually all governments are a mixture of capitalistic elements and socialistic elements. There's no purely socialist country and there's no purely capitalist country either. It's always been a mix historically, even in China, even in the Soviet Union, it's always been a mix. So it's not really a question of who's right or wrong. It's a question of what is that delicate, complex balance that needs to be struck. Which elements are correct, which elements are confused, and there's plenty of confusion within both of them. Which is not to say that there's an equal amount of confusion. You have to actually go through all the details and figure out where the confusion lies. But when you stereotype that perspective as other, then you're not going to consider those partial truths that are contained within that perspective you're not looking at, and also you're not going to consider the partial falsehoods or limitations of your own perspective. And so by doing this sort of judging and stereotyping, people don't critically look at their own position. And that is exactly the whole point. It's really just a smokescreen from looking at one's own position. And also a smokescreen from looking at other interpretations. So in a cult, usually what's denied is that interpretation is happening at all. A point of view is presented within a cult as though it's not a point of view at all, as though there was no interpretation, as though it's just factual, just the facts. And this is where I have a lot of criticism against science. Because science, you would think, well, Leo, surely the opposite of a cult is science, and you would never find cult-like dynamics within science. But what does science do as a collective body but present its perspective on the world as though it's the ultimate factual truth, and that no interpretation is involved within science, and that science is just an objective matter? That's how science is presented. Now, of course, really high-quality scientists know better. Really high-quality scientists who have studied some epistemology, they understand that actually science comes with a lot of interpretation. And that most of reality presents us with various facts and this problem called underdetermination, which means that the problem is that there's a lot of different theories and models that we can create for the exact same set of facts. So which model and theory are you going to choose? This is what's called reality sort of being underdetermined. And see, most people don't understand this about science. Most people don't understand that there can be multiple interpretations and just how much interpretation is going on within science. And this leads to a false sense of certainty. Because when you believe that what you've got is raw, pure facts, and that no interpretation, no subjectivity was involved at all, then it seems like, well, there could be no other possibility. This must be the truth. Because, science is not a perspective, it's just the objective truth. That's a very common trap that many scientists fall into. Of course, part of this whole dynamic of stereotyping and judging is closed-mindedness, which we've talked a lot about in the past. And also projection. So what the ego is doing in all this judging and stereotyping is that really it's a lot of times offloading those aspects of itself or of reality that it doesn't like, its shadow, and is projecting that onto others. So for example, with terrorism, collectively, what the American collective ego is doing is that it doesn't like to admit that the U.S. military and various geopolitical maneuvering that we do as a country hurts a lot of innocent people, kills a lot of innocent people. We bomb a lot of innocent people in trying to defend our borders as a country. But see, that's all sublimated. That becomes our collective shadow, the American collective shadow, and then that's projected out onto the terrorists. And so now we fight a crusade against the terrorists, who are the ones who kill all the civilians, and we say how evil they are for doing that. And of course, the terrorists aren't angels. They are devils. And in certain cases, they need to be stopped. No question about that. But you got to look deeper at what is really behind the emotionality of this idea of terrorism. And a lot of it is just this sort of unconscious projection of our collective shadow onto other nations, calling other nations the axis of evil.